Hello and welcome to the MassCann Education Village for another discussion that you'll all be able to see and hear. And I think you'll find this to be very, very interesting. Today I'm able to speak with Linda Noel. And I'll introduce Linda, but first I want to encourage you all, please, to visit the MassCann website. Which is a really interesting site. There's a lot of great information there. And that's at www.masscann.org. And also, while you are there, you should join MassCann because we represent the best interests of cannabis consumers in Massachusetts, and it's important that you help us do that. So thank you very much. I am here with Linda Noel. Linda is a co-founder, a former officer and director of MassCann Normal, a freedom fighter, and a farmer extraordinaire, including growing cannabis. She's got a hemp license. We can talk about that too. That's not our official list of questions, but that's an interesting topic too, because we're going to focus on history. I'm Bill Downing. I'm a former longstanding officer and director of MassCann Normal. Today I'm interviewing Linda Noel, a person who's instrumental in the formation and development of MassCann Normal, and by extension, the populist movement for cannabis law reform in Massachusetts. If marijuana law reform has benefited you in any way, Linda is one of the few activists who I can testify by my own witness, toiled for years voluntarily, and has earned your appreciation. Linda is an organic hemp farmer and a tomato farmer in Franklin, Mass. Linda is our founding president and later served as treasurer. Linda led the Freedom Fighters, which we'll talk about, and worked with early movement luminaries. Linda single-handedly disentangled MassCann's decade of ignored tax responsibilities, which was quite an effort, believe you me. Linda, thank you for all your hard work educating the public and enabling sweeping moderation of cannabis laws in Massachusetts. Also, thank you for agreeing to speak with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Bill, and thank you for all the decades of work that you've done too. It has never been just one person. MassCann has always been a group effort.
It has indeed, and the last word in our name is coalition.
It is.
So we try to stay true to our name and coalesce. So, Linda, you have a prospectus on MassCann and the early cannabis movement that so very few people have. Of course, your prospect is yours own individual, and no one has that. And that's a very valuable asset for us who are interested in history. So my first question to you would be, before MassCann started, and there was, as far as I know, a real organized effort here in Massachusetts, what happened? I've heard some things from John Leonard, and Dick Evans told me some of the things that he had been involved in. But I have a feeling that you were involved with have a whole different take on that. So what are your recollections of activists in Massachusetts before the formation of MassCann?
Well, the first time I knew we had a legalization effort in MassCann was when Mr. Steve Epstein and Mass Normal did the rally in North Adams in 1989. That was the first cannabis rally I'd ever heard of in Massachusetts. It wasn't really on the radar. I know there were activists in Western Mass who worked longer, who were active before 1989, but 1989 was when I came on the scene. I was actually a High Times freedom fighter. High Times magazine put out a call for activists all across the country to start chapters for legalization efforts in each state. The impetus of the whole movement was Jack Harrar and The Emperor Wears No Clothes. The book was published in 1989. And I went to Ann Arbor's Hash Bash. High Times put out a call for all freedom fighters to come for the great Hash Bash. And we did in great numbers on a big purple bus. And I met Jack Harrar that night. I introduced myself and I asked him to sign my copy of The Emperor. And 12 hours later, he stopped talking. Long enough for Steve Haggard to put out a call for people to stand up in each state. And with High Times backing, we would be allowed to start legalization organizations. They would put out our call to all of the High Times subscribers in the state that we were from. So after listening to Jack for 12 hours talk about the racist beginnings of hemp prohibition and marijuana prohibition and the almost century-long war against the plant and how it was being used to co-opt and silence civil rights activists, war protesters, all the different groups that were trying to better society through the last 80 years. And I found myself standing up and saying, I will represent Massachusetts. I saw the issue and I knew I couldn't do anything else about it. I come from Colorado. When I left Colorado in '87, it was a very Republican state and there was very little interest in legalizing cannabis. And the drug war was cracking down badly. A friend of mine was arrested for 12 plants that he was growing in western Colorado on a mesa 100 miles from anyone else. And they found it with an overflight helicopter and they raided his house with a SWAT team. They held him at gunpoint. They put him in jail. They sentenced him to 20 years for 12 plants. While he was going through the incarceration process, his wife killed herself. So I came from that. I have always had a anger about prohibition, that it was unjust, that it was wrong, that people were losing their lives and their livelihoods for it. I joined NORML when I was 16, and I sent them my check with my little letter that said how much I supported legalization. And I got a letter back from them that said, decriminalization is the best way to go. And I totally disagreed with that. So when High Times put out the call for the freedom fighters and Jack Harrar put out a call for people to call for legalization, he wasn't talking about decriminalization. He was talking about mass street protests and forcing people, teaching them one person at a time that it's a harmless plant, that it's a beneficial medicine, that everything you can make from petroleum, you can make from hemp. And the world would be a hell of a lot better off if we used it instead of all these synthetic stuff, chemicals that we use in its place. So I bought into that wholeheartedly, and I sent out a letter to the freedom fighters through High Times, and I got back 12 replies. One of them was a police officer in Roxbury who supported us financially for the first few years with very generous checks, because he risked his job by standing up, but he knew that every day he was being called to enforce something that was morally wrong. Steve Epstein was the head of NORML at the time, and we wanted to put on a rally in Boston.
Wait a second.
But that's how I got into
head of the state affiliate. Yeah. He wasn't the head of NORML.
No, he was the head of the NORML chapter.
Right.
That's what I meant. Mass NORML was, as far as I was concerned, Steve Epstein. He was the public face and the public speaker, and he had organized that great rally in North Adams. So we turned to him when we wanted to start a rally here in Boston that Jack Harrar could speak at that would rival Hash Bash. That was our goal. We were just 12 hippy-dippy people with a dream, and that was how MassCann's started in the beginning.
Right. Well, that part of the dream came true almost right away with rallies. Yep.
He was very supportive, and he gave us all the information we needed about how you go about getting a permit and all of that. And we went to the U.S. We had to go to the Parks Department at the USS Constitution, the rope walk at the Charlestown. That's where we wanted to hold it because the USS Constitution is made out of hemp, which is cannabis, which is marijuana. So,
yes, over 20 tons.
Yep, everything from her sails to the clothing that the sailors wore to the oakum that holds her planks together. It's all hemp. And as a matter of fact, I had to explain that to the Parks Department at the Charlestown Wharf because they did not know it. They had no idea that oakum was hemp and that the sailors' clothing was hemp and that the sails were hemp and the rigging. All they knew was that the ropes were hemp, and they got their rope from China.
Yeah, I had the same experience. Took the kids on the official tour where a seaman shows you around the boat, and I asked him what the sails were made of, and he said nylon. And I said, no, I mean, what were they made of back when this boat was sailing around in the old days? He said, yeah, nylon. I didn't want to get into it with him, but
oh, you should.
So everybody knows, nylon was invented in the 30s in Germany.
It was actually patented the same year that the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, 1937.
Uh-huh. Interesting coincidence.
Yeah. Or not.
So, tell me, you had a situation where you actually signed the documents that created MassCann.
Yep, they were signed in my living room in Mansfield, Massachusetts.
I see. And so the 12 people who were originally the signers of the organization, they were all there with you at that time, I guess?
Yeah, there was, Ron Noel was my husband. Steve Epstein was our attorney extraordinaire and our first treasurer clerk. John Harden was our editor of MassCann and the creator of the newsletter. Don Harden was our first member liaison and our resident witch. Well, we did have 13 members on the first board, and that was intentional. And Matt, the night before the first rally, we actually had a circle. I wouldn't call it an invocation, but we had a circle and we put a curse on the war on drugs. It took 3 years for that to work out, but it did. MassCann was a coalition, and she always was. It was the freedom fighters. It was normal. There were business people in suits. There were doctors. There were hippies like Don and John and myself. There were white collar workers and blue collar workers. Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition was born of necessity. We all only ever had one thing in common, and that was what we believed, that cannabis, this plant, should be legal for all uses, for fiber, for fuel, for medicine, for recreation. It was safer than alcohol, and that was the only point we ever agreed on. We would have meetings, we would all come together, and anytime any other topic came up, we would splinter off. So we agreed that Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition was going to be only about cannabis, and it worked for 30 years. That's what I love about it.
True that. Although that's still a topic of some conflict, even within the organization. You know, it's tough. It's kind of like herding cats when you've got people from so many different with so many different motivations and from so many different backgrounds, getting them to coalesce possibly, together for a single function and all that stuff is sometimes difficult, but you worked it out, so that was good. Yeah.
It continues to work it out. I love the way you guys keep broadening your horizons, bringing in new groups into the coalition.
Oh yeah. Yep. And we've got a lot of new groups starting up now. So that's another good thing that's happened as a result of moderation of cannabis laws, I believe. So why not, I know that Governor Weld signed the medical marijuana law in 1991. And I remember from my perspective, some of what had to happen in order for that to come about. But I'm more interested in knowing what your perspective of that whole campaign was. It started with an organization I was deeply involved, and I think you were as well. We called it Massachusetts Coalition for Medicinal Cannabis, or MC Squared.
Yep.
What do you remember about all that stuff?
MC Squared was a coalition of MassCann and people like Dr. Grinspoon and some political heavyweights who were serious about medical marijuana and thought we had a real shot to make it happen. MassCann was a little too broad of a coalition, and we were a little too hippy-dippy to spearhead it, so MC Squared was born. I know you worked very deeply with the people who wrote the initiative and who guided it through the State House part. And I worked with the people who were gathering the signatures in Harvard. My memory of it, there was an artist named Ian Mckinnon, who is still, he's with Artisani Theater in Cambridge. He had a street theater then, and Artisani was actually born as part of MassCann. What we did was we did street theater in Harvard Square to bring about awareness of cannabis prohibition and the need for medicinal marijuana, which people had no idea back then, that there were even a compassionate use program, and that there were people who had glaucoma and scleroderma who were actually using it for relief. This was all new. So Ian wrote some pretty innovative street theater to bring these messages across, and we were out there with drums and a petition table in Harvard Square every weekend gathering signatures, and we managed to do that part right, because you guys had enough to file the bill, and it made it, and it won, and it went to the legislature, and that was the biggest shock of all. They rewrote it. We didn't know they could do that. They gutted it. They took it and they inserted a clause that said medical marijuana was legal in the state of Massachusetts. It could be prescribed by a doctor, but it had to be provided by the federal government. And the compassionate use program had just been shut down. So catch-22. And they said, oh, well, and like we'd go away. It took almost 20 years to bring it back. You guys brought it back in 2012.
Right. Well, out of frustration, there was a step in between, because that little poison pill that they put in that legislation, made it so the program could never do anything. And so the Department of Public Health just kind of folded up their table and left the scene. Yeah. They said, oh, well, we can't get any marijuana from the federal government. So that's it. That's the end of it. And they just walked away. And we still had Governor Weld in office. He was a two-term governor. So he was there in 1997 as well. And he saw that this whole thing had been shoveled under the rug. So he pulled it out again, and we passed a second piece of legislation that ordered the Department of Public Health to start taking in applicants and approving applicants and giving out certifications. And the hope was that the certification through the state program would provide a defense. So if you were charged with possession of marijuana, you could say, well, wait a second here, I'm part of this medical program being run by the state, research program by the state, and here's my certificate. But even that didn't work. So you're right. Nothing really big happened in medical marijuana for 20 years. Yeah, long time.
It took
Um,
too long to educate.
yeah.
It really
Sus-
took that long to educate, I think. To educate enough people so there was critical mass, so you didn't have to start from the beginning and explain everything to every new person you met. That didn't happen until California passed medical.
and that was 96.
Yep.
Yeah.
We always knew California would go first. We just didn't know Massachusetts would take quite so long to follow.
Oh, wow. Um, of course, the real answer to that was money. It was really money that drove the initiatives that eventually passed this whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the banner. You have a hemp banner. I wish I'd post. I have a photo of you and Epstein on the stage in '92, I think it is, on the Common at the parking bandstand with your hemp banner in the background.
Yeah.
And I think you're holding the microphone too. It's a great picture. I'll have to find it and post it out. But that hemp banner was hung at so many events and it has such a history. Tell us about that banner.
Well, we were part of the Help End Marijuana Prohibition movement, which was Jack Harrar. He had people set up rallies all across the country, and he was traveling in an RV at the time with the Help End Marijuana Prohibition folks. We were starting to do an education table in Boston, and MassCann wasn't even actually an idea on the horizon yet. We were just starting to get the idea for the Freedom Rally, and we wanted to be able to do the information tables that they had at Ann Arbor, where you had a banner, you had Jack's books, you had T-shirts. We sold. This is one of the hemp shirts we sold with the warning from. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a warning on here from the DEA: "Do not smoke this shirt." They made this, put this on here. We were trying to teach people. Jack said, you got to teach people one person at a time. So we took the first money that we were given from our first membership. I told you the police officer in Roxbury sent us a check. Well, we took that money and we bought a banner and some copies of Jack's book, and we started doing a table in Boston. And the banner was so we would have something behind us so people would know what the heck we were doing. So it said help end marijuana prohibition can be used for food, fuel, fiber, medicine, and more. And then the first time we flew that was the very first hemp table, which was on the Boston Common in 1990 at the Nelson Mandela rally.
Oh, okay, that was on the Common. I thought it was on the Esplanade. But...
Esplanade, true, yes.
Okay.
I can. No, you're right. But the police who were patrolling it were the Common Police. They called them the BMC, Boston Municipal.
Okay, that may have been in the old days. Now the Esplanade is actually state police territory, which is always a big problem. That's why MassCann never had events there.
Yeah. But back then it was Nelson Mandela was in town. He was touring in support of his anti-apartheid movement in Boston, and we supported the anti-apartheid movement, and we thought, well, as long as we were there, we could distribute some medical marijuana and hemp information too. So we had Jack's book, and we had some bumper stickers that said, this bud's for you, with a Budweiser on it. And we had some copies of Hemp for Victory that we had made on VCR tapes, which was the movie the U.S. government put out in 1942, asking farmers to grow hemp for the war effort, Hemp for Victory. We had a little copy of that, and we had birdseed.
Okay, so this is a whole separate, we were talking about the banner, and that was great. And that's an amazing thing. And just to tie the bow on the banner, it was kind of lost in the shuffle for a while. MassCann had it in their storage area, and but then it was born again. I know Flinney, our president, Bill Flynn, was digging through storage, and he knew you wanted it, and so he pulled it out and set it aside, and he got it to me, and I got it to you, and so the circle was finally complete. Just so the listeners know that banner has been through much, and you still have it. It's somewhere there.
I was gonna do something, but I couldn't get it in the screen.
So now that we've completed the banner story, this is the same event, the Nelson Mandela event, where you brought all this stuff you were just listing, including birdseed.
Well, we were trying to get hemp, that we could show people that this is what you could do with hemp. So Jack had these great shirts made, so we had these. We couldn't get t-shirts yet out of hemp cotton. It was very hard to get it imported from China. The DEA was very against us allowing us to have it. But there were a couple of things that were imported regularly that we discovered. One of them was hemp twine, which is every gardener can pick it up in any gardening center. It's always been there, even though hemp prohibition. And the other thing was birdseed. Most people don't know that the little white seeds in birdseed are actually sterilized hemp seed. And when we read that in Jack's book, we were intrigued. But you couldn't buy it in bulk in the United States. You had to import it from China. So we did. We imported a 50-pound box of hemp seed from China, and it actually came with a DEA sticker on top of it that said, "This seed is certified, sterilized, and legal in Mass." And we bought the hemp twine, so we made up all these little friendship bracelets made out of hemp twine, and we tie-dyed them. We were selling those for $3 a piece. We were raising money to try to put the rally on, and we decided we would sell the hemp seed, so we put it in little baggies, individually wrapped, and we put a little label on it that said, "Makes the birds happy, so they sing. Makes me happy too." And and on the reverse side it said, "Feed the birds." So we were going to sell them for a nickel or a quarter, and then we decided we'd just give them away and have people feed the birds. So we were just standing there at our table handing out little packets of hemp seed, and the cops came. And they looked at the table, they looked at the banner, then they looked at the table, and they looked at the pot leaves on the bumper stickers, and they looked at Jack's book. And they looked at the hemp seed, and one of the cops picked it up and read that this makes birds happy, makes me happy too. And they flipped the entire table upside down, and every bird seed went everywhere. And they put my husband in cuffs, and they started to cuff me. And he said, no, this is all mine. She didn't have anything to do with it. And they started to haul him away. And he said, "You better call Steve." So we called Steve Epstein. And they hauled him down to...
Steve's an attorney, by the way.
Yes, Stephen Epstein was our attorney. He was the head of Mass Normal, but we knew he was an attorney. So we figured he was probably the only guy who could figure out how to help us. And we had never occurred to us that we were going to be busted for possession of hemp seed. But the charges were possession with intent to distribute, and there was more than 50 pounds there. So we were kingpins. Steve came down to Suffolk. We went to the Suffolk County Courthouse where they were holding him, Ron Noel, and we were waiting for them. We had posted bail, and we were waiting for them to bring him down. And Steve is standing in the center of the courthouse up on this great marble pillar, and he's got Jack's book in one hand, and he's orating at the top of his lungs. He's reading Jack's book to everybody going through the courthouse. And I looked at Steve and I said, "This man is my hero, and wherever he leads, I will follow for the rest of my life." And I always have. It was a great day. It was a crazy story, though. It took a whole year to end that case. Harvey Silverglade took it pro bono. And
just so people know, Harvey Silverglade is one of the most successful attorneys in Boston. He's retired now, I'm sure.
Very prominent attorney, worked on civil rights issues. Took our case pro bono. We were before the Superior Court, and he was at the Suffolk Courthouse steps. Went in the front door. He had the box of hemp seed with the DEA sticker on the top of it in his arms, going into the courthouse door. And the cop who had arrested my ex-husband was waiting for him at the door and arrested him and charged him with possession with intent to distribute hemp seed. It finally ended. We were before Marie Lopez in the Superior Court, and she let us get up and testify. I was allowed to sit on the stand and tell Jack's entire book, the beginning of hemp prohibition all the way up to the Nelson Mandela rally, and how the hemp seed that we were busted for was sterilized and certified by the DEA. And she said, wait a minute. She turned to the prosecutor and she said, did you try to germinate that seed? And the prosecutor shuffled through some papers and said, I don't think so. And she said, well, germinate the seed. This is continued until the seed germinates or it doesn't. And she sent it back. And 4 weeks later, the seeds didn't germinate and she dismissed the case. But that was a year and a half later. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen, ever been through. It was silly from begin to end. And in the end, we got no apology from the city of Boston or the police department or anything. And when the Boston Globe, they ran every story from the arrest all the way up to the last time we were in trial, in the middle of the Metro section, second page, Ron Noel's name was prominent right across it. And when the case was dismissed, it was on the back page of the paper. It was a little tiny box like this, and they called him Raymond Noel. They misspelled his name. And they didn't even print a retraction. So that was the beginning of the legalization effort. We knew right there it was going to be a really long fight. Really long fight.
Yeah. That a wacko rogue cop or two would, think that this was a prosecutable case when they've got, when it's DEA approved seed. They obviously didn't know the law. The Substance Abuse Controlled Substances Act specifically allows hemp seed and anything hemp stock in any form, including twine. And the police don't know the law. And that's what this situation was. But the DA, who was prosecuting the case, who brought the case to a judge, that person should have known better, should have looked into the law at least enough to understand that there was no case here.
I think a lot of the intent was to discourage us. We were the first activists to really start making the news, and we were being blatant about it. And I think they thought if they stifled us, the movement would go away. But I think it backfired. I think people kept reading the story, and MassCann kept growing. Every time the story ran, we'd get a new member or two. So it actually worked against them, in my opinion. But
all press is good press.
That was the tactics they used back then, was to target the organizers and scare them. My house was broken into and ransacked. The police, as a matter of fact, it was broken in and ransacked just a week or two after the arrest on the Common. So they were looking for papers related to MassCann. They went all through the Freedom Fighter newsletter information and everything. It was really rather hinky. And they walked off with a small jewelry box. And when I called the police, they came in, instead of looking in the living room where the jewelry box and the television had been and the door was broken into, they went to the back of the house and they wanted to know why a closet had a lock on it. It's like, how do you know the closet's there? Why do you know there's a lock there? And what business of it is it yours? And I certainly didn't open the door because there were plants on the other side of it. But yeah, they took that tactic in many other states. A friend of mine in West Virginia ran full-page news ads in his local hometown paper for the freedom fighters. He ended up spending 15 years in jail for cultivation. They harassed him and hounded him and targeted him, and in the end found a plant in his backyard and made him akin to a kingpin. So
the 2.2 pounds of marijuana from one plant theory.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, for many, many decades, the police used the standard where they assumed that every marijuana plant that you were growing had the potential to produce 2.2 pounds of marijuana, which just by some coincidence happens to be a kilo.
Yeah.
And so when you were being prosecuted, they would figure out how much, if that was sold by the joint, you'd make about $500,000 off of one plant. And so they charge you with distribution of some massive amount of value.
My second husband, Ron Massad, who is also a signer of MassCann, co-founder, and that we actually met because he was labeled a kingpin. He had a garage and he had 50 marijuana plants in it in Hanover, Massachusetts. In 1989, he was a victim of Operation Green Merchant, where the DEA subpoenaed the mailing and credit card information from several hydroponic companies in California. They used that information to trace back to the people in other states who had bought from these companies. They didn't know what they'd bought. All they had to do was say that they had bought. That was enough to get them warrants for no-knock heat sensor scans of your house from the outside. And that warrant was then, if it showed undue heat loss, would then allow them to get a warrant to enter your house for search. And he was brought down in that operation. He had 50 plants. They said 2.2 pounds a plant. They valued his operation at $1.5 million in 1989. He was the biggest pot bust in Plymouth County history. Plymouth County history, way back when. And it was just 50 plants. So, yeah, things were different back then. The drug war was in full swing, and cannabis was considered a gateway drug. We had a long uphill battle to fight.
So you mentioned that you were in Colorado back in the old days, and that the state was very Republican, or not Republican, but because this is not a conservative liberal issue, that it was a very conservative state, and that people would not consider marijuana law reform at all. But you'd been back again, hadn't you, to Colorado more recently?
No, I haven't returned since 1989.
Okay. So were there other states that you had any experience seeing the activists at work or hearing of activism?
I knew activists all across the country through the freedom fighters. I did the newsletter for the High Times Freedom Fighters. It's called Let Freedom Ring. And what that was our way of communicating with each other, activists in each state, keeping people apprised of how they were operating and how the pushback that they were getting. Illinois had a really solid organization. They were very intent and involved early. Obviously, Michigan was farthest along. They had Hash Bash had been operating for about 20 years when I was there, and it was very professionally run. Washington State looked to MassCann and then started Hash Bash, and they are legendary around the world now. California had a really solid legalization movement. There were several different factions. Jack Herrera was one of them and considered to be the most outlandish, but they were more seriously business-minded people behind the original medical bill in '96. and then the legalization there took a more serious business orientated push. We always figured California would be the ones who would do it. We were really surprised that it was Northern California, San Francisco activists who got medical pass before Jack managed to get full legalization, because boy, he tried. He did many stunts along the way, and garnered some enemies in the more business orientated legalization movement. He and Normal clashed heads a lot. West Virginia had a really vibrant movement, and they had some success on the local levels with refusing to enforce. And then they were very successful in stamping that out by arresting enough activists to shut it down.
Jeez. Well, unfortunately, we're seeing police react badly to civilian protests even today, and not necessarily concerning cannabis so much, but some other issues. So though times change, situations don't seem to change all that much. Police tactics remain disgusting in many ways. And I can speak to that as well, unfortunately. So one of the aspects of your participation in the cannabis industry is the fact that you are a farmer and have been for a long, long time. People should know that Linda runs a wonderful little tomato stand open in the summers in Franklin on Lincoln Road or Lincoln Street. Lincoln Street. Okay, Lincoln Street in Franklin. And she grows the most insanely good tomatoes you've ever had in your life. And they're tomatoes that you really can't find other places. She selects very interesting types of tomatoes so that you've got a wide variety of tomatoes for various uses and things like that. And more recently, with the change of the laws, Linda has become a hemp farmer as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And congratulations again on your hemp farm. I've seen some great pictures of some of the buds that you've grown. And of course, I'm involved in selling hemp products in my business. So you're an important aspect to our industry, very valuable aspect to our industry. And tell us, how have things been going? I guess in particular, what I really want you to talk about is how easy it is to be a hemp farmer, how hard it is to be a hemp farmer, what hemp farms do in states generally, and what hemp farms can do in states here in Massachusetts. Those are the kinds of questions I'd have for you about that.
It's pretty easy to become a hemp farmer in Massachusetts. We have a really straightforward application process. They charge you $300 to be a grower. An additional $200 will get you a processor license too. This year, our program in its entirety was accepted by the USDA. So now we are federally compliant, as well as we have our own state program, and we operate under our own state laws. We never have conformed to the 2014 Farm Bill. We went straight into commercial production with the blessing of the legislature. They figured 100 years was enough time. All of that was going really well until the FDA decided that CBD is a prescribable drug, which threw a monkey wrench into all the cannabidiol enhanced edible products that you can make. And we had a really nice little hemp industry going before June of last year when the FDA made this decision. We had every coffee house in Massachusetts would give you CBD shots in your coffee in the morning. You could get CBD in your food. You could order any kind of CBD tincture. We had all kinds of great ideas. There was a company that was going to open. They were making CBD infused soda pop. up on the North Shore. I thought that was going to be a great idea. Organic soda pop with CBD in it. And the future looked really bright. And then the FDA said, nope, you can't put CBD hemp in food. And unfortunately, in the state of Massachusetts, we wrote cannabis is allowed in edibles into the medical marijuana law. So unless it has THC in it, you can't make an edible with the cannabis plant. So that put a monkey wrench into the whole industry, which we've been fighting ever since, and we're not getting very far. With COVID, we were getting really close just before COVID-19 happened. And the legislature, everything's been put on hold. All I want to talk about is municipal budgets and things near and dear to the COVID-19 response at the moment. So we're patiently waiting for a time when Beacon Hill will be receptive to cannabis issues again, and then we'll go back to them. But by then it will be too late for this year, and everything will have to be refiled for the new legislature coming in next year. So we're not real optimistic about our chances for this year. We got APR, we got a bill to allow farmers who have their farms in agriculturally protected restrictions, which is an agreement you've set up with the state that says, I'm going to be a farm. I will never allow my land to be developed into a housing development. Therefore, I should get to pay less income taxes on my land because it's never going to be worth millions. If you did that, you weren't allowed to become a hemp farmer because of the difference between the state hemp program and the federal hemp program. They weren't reconciling it. Now, even though the state program is now in reconciliation with the federal program, that little bit of legislation got passed by the House, got passed by the Senate, got kicked back to the Senate, to the House Ways and Means Committee, and is kind of sitting somewhere in a clerk's office and nothing's being done with it. We can't figure out why, but still it's not legal to have a hemp license on a real farm that has an agricultural restriction on it. We lost that battle. The second bill is H4001. It's a great little bill, allows hemp in food, lets you put it in dog treats, brings back that whole industry. It circumvents the federal rules, but Massachusetts has always circumvented the federal rules. We did so with marijuana, we did so with medical marijuana, and we did so with hemp in the beginning, but for some reason, they're a little hesitant to do it now. And that's leaving us in a big legal limbo. All that you can legally grow hemp for right now is topical preparations and fiber and seed, and no farm in Massachusetts is growing for fiber or seed. We don't have the acreage for it here. So we're in between a rock and a hard place. We had 120 hemp farms last year, and I have no idea how many of them went and re-upped their license. I did. Several of them I haven't heard from since COVID-19 shut everything down. So I'm not sure. We're in a limbo here.
How upsetting. It's getting, we've only got about 10 minutes left, but I did want to ask you about the effort for Baystate Repeal. I've asked a couple of other people the same question, and I want to ask you too. There were two ballot initiatives that were attempted in 2016. One was what eventually became question 4, and they referred to that as regulation of marijuana like alcohol. And that's what we have now as law here in Massachusetts. But the other initiative, which did not unfortunately gather enough signatures to get on the ballot, was the Baystate Repeal initiative, which was quite different. And you had mentioned Steve Epstein before and how you admired him. And Steve is the author and the chief protagonist for Baystate Repeal. Tell us about Baystate Repeal. What do you think? The legislature rewrote our medical bill. I witnessed that happen. the legislature seems to rewrite everything, mess with everything. They rewrote our legalization bill. Do you think they would have rewritten the Baystate Repeal bill if it had been passed as an initiative?
I guarantee they would have. I guarantee they would have. And they probably would have done worse with it than what they did to question 4. Because Baystate Repeal would have been true reform. It would have been put cannabis back as a farm product, completely regulated by the Department of Agriculture as a farm commodity. It would have only come under inspection by the health department at the time that it became a consumable for an end user. So it would have operated like milk. It would have had food safety added on to the end of it, but it wouldn't have been regulated like the Gaming Commission is regulating it now. It would have been a business that had specific rules, a commodity that farmers would grow just like tomatoes and would be inspected only like milk. And it would have been an open commodity. It would have been mom and pop shops. It wouldn't have been, the billionaires taking over the industry with vertically integrated. It would have been a different world. It really would have. And the legislature was scared shitless. Was scared of that, terrified of that. It was just too much, too fast for them. So I guarantee they would have shut it down and they would have gutted it worse. MassCann took Baystate Repeal's initiative and had it rewritten as a bill, and it was filed in 2017 as an amendment to the process of rewriting question 4. And we did get a sponsor. Denise Provost backed it, and we managed to get quite a bit of support in the whole committee, the Joint Committee on Marijuana that was rewriting the bill in the legislature. And Mr. Mark Cusack had picked it up and taken the language and had prepared it in a way that, it wasn't exactly what we wanted, but it was pretty close. And then it went into Robert DeLeo's office, and it came back out as the Gaming Commission bill that had been rewritten to put cannabis in where it used to say slot machines. So the political will of the leadership of the House and Senate wasn't such that Baystate Repeal would have fared any differently, and probably would have fared worsely, in my opinion.
Yeah, what an awful shame too. A few things that I want to observe about that are that it's as though the legislature thinks that normal people, attorneys in private practice and things like that, are incapable of writing laws. And I just think that's patently false. That's where our laws came from in the first place.
Right.
If any of you know Steve Epstein and how he works, he's very, very detail oriented.
Yes, he is.
And that a lot of the kinks you might find in other laws, I doubt you'd find much of that in the Baystate Repeal law. There were some kinks in the Question 4 law, and for people that don't know, they had made some changes to their language where they were adding and removing paragraphs. And some of the numbering on some of the paragraphs hadn't been changed in order to reflect the addition or subtraction of paragraphs. And so when you had parts of the bill that referred to paragraphs by number in other parts of the bill, those numbers were referring to something that was completely different. It was wrong, and it wasn't purposeful. It was just the editing process wasn't done properly. And actually Epstein pointed that out.
And he was kind enough to let them know.
Yeah. And they, in a panic, because the language had already been published. And they went to the Secretary of State in a panic and said, "Wait, we've got to please allow us to change this." And they say, "Yeah, potheads." Oh man. So
I'm still hoping that someday we will end up with Baystate Repeal. I know now we're 3 years out from legalization, and people are starting to realize that the sky hasn't fallen yet. I think that as more and more mom and pop shops finally get to open, and the CCC gets their act together, people will see that pot on Main Street in your town actually is bringing in revenue and doing good things, and the sky didn't fall, and the little kids are just fine. And in the end, the CCC, it will probably never go away, but all of the good parts of Baystate Repeal will get implemented around it, I think. That's my hope.
Well, from your lips to Mother Nature's ears. How does this year's crop look? How are things going with your farm?
Good. The babies we just finished transplant last week. I've got a couple hundred CBD plants, and I've got 100 CBG plants that are looking really fine. And the tomatoes are about waist high. And we have 3 clusters set. We should be in business in the middle of July. Fingers crossed.
Wow. CBG plants, that's very interesting. As I understand it, CBG is like a precursor. I always thought that you got CBG just by harvesting your plants earlier.
That's what I thought too. A processor did some research, brought back some seeds from Oregon that are professed to be very high CBG, and I've seen the COA, the certificate of analysis. The THC is 0.23%. The CBG is 6 to 9%, depending on the strain. He had 3 strains, and absolutely no CBD at all.
Huh.
No CBD in it. So they've done some breeding. They're looking specifically for CBG because the recent studies have shown promise in pancreatic cancer, efficacy in pain, etc. And bone, it's not a drug. It's not part of Epidiolex. It's not a cannabinoid that's in any other patented medication at this time. So at this point, hemp products that contain CBG should work just as well as the ones with CBD, but should be able to get around the little problem where CBD got descheduled and moved into a prescribable schedule. I think it's Schedule 5 now. So my hemp with the CBD, I have questions about whether I can even legally contract to sell it as CBD. I don't think I can, but the CBG, not so.
Got it. Well, and of course, we've got a whole bunch of different cannabinoids, and who knows what we can breed plants to produce for us. And unfortunately, in this brave new world, I just heard an article now that there's a Japanese company that's making CBD from orange peels.
I see that. And I've been telling the legislature for 2 years now, you can get CBG from hops. So if they want to restrict something, they're going to have to be a little bit more firm than just saying hemp's bad.
So we're drawing to our hour. I see it's about an hour now, and this has been a great discussion.
I had a lot of fun. I want to thank you and Lorna, and Catherine and everybody for including me.
Oh yeah, we had to have you. After all, you were our first president, and that's quite an honor in my opinion. And you also did an awful lot of work, great work again, I want to mention, as a treasurer in the last few years.
Steve used to say about the being the president part was it wasn't so much as it was an honor, it was that when everybody else took 2 steps back, I was stupid enough not to.
Well, we're really happy that you did. So thank you all for joining us. This has been a great time, I think, and hopefully edifying for all of you. Once again, please visit the MassCann website. That's www.masscann.org, and sign up and join us. And you can be part of history too, just like Linda and I. Thank you all very much.
Join MassCann. Make a difference.